I don't remember generally what I say during a broadcast, but when I've been in Chicago, oh, you're the guy who said they call him Mr. Jordan in Chicago. It didn't even register to me until people started saying that. I appreciate that.
And you are in Australia right now.
You're talking NBA basketball. You're talking great teams. You're talking great individual players.
Takes it off, and there's number 23, and of course Johnny goes nuts.
We're all getting goosebumps thinking about it now.
I just tried to go out there and play my game.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Adam. I don't like anybody. I'm not a people person.
Strand, you made the pass, yes. Christian, can you catch the ball? Yes.
All the stars were aligned and all the muscles fired at the right time, and I was able to get off the ground and throw one down.
I was saving that as a surprise for you.
And now, introducing your host for In All Airness, Adam Ryan.
Welcome to episode 140. Thanks for joining me. I'm excited to have longtime broadcaster Jim Brinson join the show. We dive into Jim's journey through radio and TV over many decades. A highlight of our chat is Jim's experience covering Michael Jordan's NBA regular season debut on October 26, 1984. Jim has some fantastic stories to share. One involves the legendary Wes Unseld, rest in peace, and Danny Ainge, while the other takes us to a hilarious moment during Jim's unforgettable visit to Wilt Chamberlain's bathroom. You won't want to miss it. Show notes for this episode and access to a huge archive of past episodes are available at inallairness.com. Now, on to the show. My guest today has a wealth of radio and TV broadcast experience spanning over 50 years. He's called a multitude of sporting events, including the NBA, NFL, soccer, tennis, and boxing. 40 years ago to the day, as we record this, he was the play-by-play man for the NBA debut of rookie Michael Jordan. Jim Brinson, thanks for joining me.
My man, thank you. Shocked that you were able to track me down. I tried to stay incognito.
You did a pretty good job. You attended high school in Seattle, and then you graduated from Eastern Washington State College in 1969. I mentioned tennis in the intro. Is it true that you were a number one singles tennis player back in your college days?
You are supposed to not even know that information. I still play tennis, obviously not like I did back then.
I read that you may have even headed out onto a satellite tour not long after your college days ended.
Stop. Where are you getting all this? This is ridiculous. But I appreciate it very much for the hard work on the research.
I believe you worked for several Spokane area stations before you moved to California. How were those early years in broadcasting as you were establishing a name for yourself in the industry?
It's totally different back then than what it is today, where you could just put your link up and everybody can watch you and try to hire you. Back then, obviously, there was none of that. The way that you would try to improve your job status was to move from city to city. So when I first began, I started out as a radio disc jockey and then matriculated into television as a television news anchor and then sports anchor. Once I kind of got rolling and I landed in Portland, Oregon, my sports broadcasting really took off from there.
I read a snippet online that said that you worked the microphone for the 1970s Golden State Warriors. They won the title in 1975, led by Hall of Famer, the legendary Rick Barry. How did that opportunity present itself, Jim?
I was working in San Francisco at the time as a television sports anchor, and I was broadcasting San Jose State football and basketball games. I did some USF basketball as well. KNBR radio, this was a radio job. The man who was the longtime broadcaster, Bill King, tremendous broadcaster, also doubled as the then Oakland Raiders broadcaster. During the course of the NBA season and the NFL season, they coincide, so he would miss games. So when he missed games, they asked me if indeed I would do those games. One of the first games that I did I had to fly from San Francisco to Washington, D.C., Martin Luther King Day. I did an afternoon game that tipped at noon between the Golden State Warriors and then the Washington Bullets. Now they're called the Wizards. I had a taxi waiting for me when that game was over. It raced me to Dulles Airport. The plane was on time, thank goodness. I got on the plane, flew back into Oakland, jumped in a taxi, took the 15-minute ride to the Oakland Alameda County Coliseum. The North American Soccer League, Oakland Stompers, were playing a game that night. I was the broadcaster for those games as well on KNBR radio. So I did an NBA game on the East Coast and a North American League soccer game on the same day on the same radio station. It's probably never been done before. The way that airlines are now, you'd have to use private jets, and I did not.
How times have changed, eh? What period of time were you actually working the microphone there for some of those Warriors games?
It was probably 76, 77, 78, right in there. And then I ended up taking a television job in Dallas. I did the preseason Cowboy games on television. I did Southwest Conference football and basketball. I did tennis. And then the Mavericks came in to being an expansion team. And I was the first television broadcaster for the Dallas Mavericks that first year.
That's incredible. So that's the 1981 season. What do you remember of those fledgling days in Texas as the Mavericks were just getting underway there under head coach Dick Motta?
Well, Dick Motta was the head coach, and they had guys like Jim Spanarkel, Tom Lagarde, Abdul Jelani, just to mention a few, and they were terrible. But they were an expansion team. And you have to remember back then, there weren't all the cable channels that there are now. The games were carried on regular television. So we did about a 25 to 27 game television schedule. And then also we did the Texas Rangers games on television, the baseball team. And I did about 45 television games for the Texas Rangers as well.
Did you have a favorite sport that you enjoyed covering most?
I think to begin with that it was football, whether if it was college or NFL. But as my career began to progress, I think I came to love calling the NBA. And the reason, nothing against the other sports, but I think it was the pace of the game. The pace of the game is so fast, as you know, and you're calling most likely the greatest athletes on the planet that are in sensational shape. They run, they jump, they do contortions in the air. It's absolutely amazing how good of athletes the NBA players are. Probably midway through my career calling NBA games, I think my affinity for loving the NBA as much as I still do, I think that's when it started to happen.
Once that tenure in Dallas ended, you had an opportunity to head to Washington to work with the Bullets Network, WDCA.
I ended up getting the Washington Bullets television broadcast job. I did Maryland football and basketball. I did some things with the then Baltimore Colts before they left town. And I was standing out in the middle of a snowstorm as the Mayflower trucks were pulling out of town, headed for Indianapolis, doing a live shot. The Washington Bullets job, that's when I worked with Wes Unseld, rest his soul. Wes, a longtime NBA star in the league with the Bullets, worked in the front office. When I joined the broadcast team, I worked with Wes when we did the games. He and I were the two folks that ended up broadcasting the Bulls that night and Michael Jordan's NBA debut.
Wes Unseld, rest in peace. His on-court prowess speaks for itself. How did it feel to be in his shadow with all he had accomplished, and now you were teaching him some of the tricks of the trade on the TV side of things?
Wes was terrific. He was willing to learn, and we practiced a few times before we even did a live game. We did a couple of simulated games. Here's a funny Wes Unseld story. We're in Boston, the old Garden against the Celtics, and the broadcast table is on the floor at that time. It's in the third quarter, and Robert Parrish takes a swing at Bullet center Tom McMillan. All hell breaks loose. People are jumping on top of people, and they're moving our way. I'm like getting up, and Wes is getting up, and we're trying to step back so we're not in the middle of it. Danny Ainge is down on the floor in front of us, and with our headsets on, Wes is yelling, Danny Ainge, you're the dirtiest player. I'm going to come over there and kick your ass. He says that live on TV. Now, as you well know, Wes Unseld is 6'8", 300 pounds, and I'm like hanging on his arm. Wes, come on, dude, we got to get away. Wes, back up. But that happened during a broadcast.
That is fantastic. I love the stories. Per Bill Hazen, Bulls play-by-play man during Jordan's rookie season, he covered the team for Sports Vision. The network had to decide whether to look at airing a broadcast for the Blackhawks NHL game the following day or the Bulls season opener. They went with the former. That left you as the lone broadcaster for Michael Jordan's debut.
Billy and I go back a long way. We crossed paths lots of times throughout our career. Him being a play-by-play guy like myself. And the way that he explained it to me was Jerry Reinsdorf at the time wanted to draw a big crowd. And he was afraid if he put the game on TV, nobody would show up for the number 3 pick in the NBA draft to see his debut. He thought they would draw a small crowd. So they decided at that time that they were not going to televise the game. You are correct. The broadcast that everybody sees is the only TV version of that game. They had a big crowd, but the Chicago Stadium was not sold out that night.
There was 13,913 people at the game. Just for context, the last home game before Jordan came to the Bulls, April of 1984, they had a very lowly 4,042 fans, which is unbelievable contrast. So fair to say that in the space of 6 months, the impact and introduction of Jordan certainly brought that interest there. How did you feel as the game was getting underway? Jordan gets introduced and you say those famous words now, which echo right across the world.
I don't remember generally what I say during a broadcast. You're trying to call the game. But when I've been in Chicago, oh, you're the guy who said they call him Mr. Jordan in Chicago. It didn't even register to me until people started saying that. So I appreciate that. The thing that I found interesting about the game, there was no real build-up. In other words, the local television sportscast said, well, yeah, the Bulls are playing tonight. Michael Jordan makes his debut. There was no like, oh my God, Michael Jordan's making his debut. There was nothing. When Wes and I prepared for the game, we thought that we would obviously reference what he accomplished at North Carolina and bring that into the broadcast, which we did. But it wasn't like he was the number 1 overall pick and the most dominant player in college basketball, because he wasn't. He wasn't the most dominant player in college basketball. We thought that we would see a guy who would help the Bulls improve, but would just have a normal number 3 pick debut, and that would be it. And of course, we all know what happened, and the rest is history.
The 1985 Washington Bullets had guys like Gus Williams, Jeff Ruland, and Ricky Mahorn, the famed Beef Brothers. You've got guys like Greg Ballard and Jeff Malone, just to name a few. What access did you have to these guys on game days, which I'm sure is completely different to what media members get today?
Back then, the players did not fly in their team planes. There weren't any. Everybody flew commercial. The players always sat in the first class seats because there was more room. Dopes like me, just the lowly broadcasters, would ride in coach. But I still had a great time. Guys were different just from the standpoint that we were all like on the bus together, going to the airport, fly the plane, get off, get on the bus, go to the hotels. So we were around the players constantly, and you became friends with them. I'm not saying the guy's going to call me and say, hey, you want to go get a cold one? But they would always talk to us, especially Wes, obviously. They would always say things like, really looking forward to you saying my name a lot tonight on TV because I'm going to have a big game. And we'd have a laugh about that. There was a rule in the NBA that you would play your game that night, and the next morning, you had to be on one of the early morning flights to go to the next city to make sure that you got to the next city. So there was always that aspect, especially during the winter.
October the 26th of 1984.
Jim Brinson along with Wes Unseld, Chicago Stadium, Chicago, Illinois. And they are now set to introduce the Chicago Bulls. And the fanfare begins with the music, Michael Jackson's Thriller in the background. Here is the man. They call him Mr. Jordan in Chicago. The standing ovation for Michael Jordan from North Carolina, the number 3 pick in the NBA draft. And this game is underway as it is Michael Jordan who comes down with the basketball.
You had a great line early in the quarter. You referenced a conversation that you had with Dudley Bradley.
I asked Dudley if he had any special plans on how to play Jordan tonight. He just said, hopefully he'll pass to a teammate.
Which I thought was fantastic. He was a great defender back in that time, Dudley Bradley.
Was a very good defender, yes.
Jordan's first score in the game came on the right wing.
Front court to Jordan, looking for penetration. Spin move, hangs in the air, off the glass and in. And that's what Wes and I were talking about at the pregame show.
You knew it was going in. All this excitement, it had to go.
Timeout has been called by the Bullets. They don't want to get this one get out of hand early. We'll take a break. 7:19 to play first quarter. The score, Bulls 16, Bullets 8.
The broadcast does exist on YouTube. How did it feel to look back at it all these years later and what you now know became, of course, of Michael Jordan and his impact worldwide?
I can tell you right now that when the game began and we saw a couple of his moves, including that very first basket off the spin, Wes and I, during a commercial break, and I do remember this distinctly, looked at each other and we both said almost simultaneously, this guy's really good. He's really good. And then, of course, the game continued. Dudley Bradley, I'm glad you referenced him because he was a great guy. I sat and talked to him a lot. We'd sit together sometimes on the bus, and we'd always talk basketball. And I talked to him about how he tried to defend because he always guarded the team's best player, unless it was a center. He talked about what his mindset was. I found that interesting that you remembered what I said. I don't remember that, but it is a great line that he gave me. And obviously I use that on the broadcast. I just hope he passes the ball.
So a standing ovation after one for the hometown Chicago Bulls, and their fans appreciate so far what they see. When we come back, we'll have the start of the second quarter. The score, Bulls 34, Bullets 19.
During the second quarter of this game, an interesting moment, Michael Jordan attempted his first dunk. He was called for travel on the play, but he was met at the rim by a great friend of my show, Jeff Ruland, Man Mountain. Jordan landed very hard on the floor, and obviously the crowd quieted.
45-28 the score. Chicago's led the entire game. Jordan walked that time. Ooh, and Jordan went up and came down hard and is injured.
You can't go up against Jeff Ruland in that matter.
I don't want to oversell it, of course, but it was a dramatic moment that clearly could have had significant impact on the course of NBA history.
I can tell you this. Not many people dunked on Ruland because Jeff, as you just referred to him, was a mountain of a man. Yep. Him and Rick Mahorn were aptly called the Bruise Brothers, not the Blues Brothers with John Belushi and Tom Aykroyd, but the Bruise Brothers, and they bruised everybody. And Michael Jordan got seriously bruised that night. When that play happened, the entire arena went silent because he didn't move right away.
Boy, you could just tell the air went out of everybody when that fall took place.
It was so quiet, our microphones picked up people. Is he dead? Did they kill him? And then he started to move. I can tell you right now, Jeff Ruland not only did something like that to Michael Jordan, he did that to a lot of players. And I love Jeff Ruland as a player.
Terrific player, underrated star of the 1980s. Unfortunately, injuries played their toll on his career, but boy, he was great when he was at his peak. The Bullets outscored Chicago 26-23 in the second quarter and were down by 12 points at the half. Is there any moment during the game that does stand out all these years later when you think back on it, Jim?
Orlando Woolridge had a terrific game.
Yes.
And it overshadowed what Jordan did in his debut. I think he only scored like 16 points, Michael did. Woolridge went for 28, and he went through a stretch where he was pretty much unguardable.
Rebound to Sidney Green, lofts it off to Woolridge. He blows right by everybody and dunks. Orlando Woolridge with the first big magic moment of the night.
They were feeding him the ball like when some guy gets hot. Nothing changes when you're playing basketball. A guy gets hot, getting the ball. And so that's what the Bulls were doing. Woolridge and the way that he got hot and was scoring helped turn the tide in that game.
28 points for Woolridge, a splendid game.
I read an interesting quote after the game. Jordan said, "If I can be a decoy, that's just fine with me."
Jordan now quickly into the front court, penetrates to the hoop, hangs in the air, give it off Steve Johnson, and he gets the easy bucket.
This is what's going to make Michael Jordan so valuable to this Chicago Bulls team. He's just going to draw attention from everybody, and it's going to leave his teammates open.
Rather amusing in hindsight, given what his career would go on to be.
Jordan to the hoop, king in the air, score! Bullets one time. And the fans here at Chicago Stadium on their feet, they like what they see. 3:11 to play in this game. Chicago has once again assumed command of the contest. 98-82. Back with more action after this.
He did have the 16 points, as you said, exactly right. He was only 5 of 16 from the field, but he did have 6 boards, 7 assists, and 2 steals. So pretty impressive debut, to say the least, all the same. And as you mentioned, Orlando Woolridge had the 28 points. He had 9 rebounds. Quentin Daly had 25 points. And Steve Johnson out of Oregon State had 18 points and 9 rebounds for the Bulls. The Bullets had 6 players in double figures: Frank Johnson, Gus Williams, Ricky Mahorn, Jeff Ruland, Dudley Bradley, and Darren Day. Speaking of Dudley Bradley, he had 10 assists in this game. Fantastic. The final score was 109-93. The Bulls ran away with the game in the fourth quarter, outscoring Washington 31-19 after the Bullets brought it to within just 4 points at three-quarter time.
And 1 second left on the clock. This ball game is all over.
It was a game that the Bullets collapsed in the fourth quarter. To be perfectly honest with you, they did that several times throughout the course of the regular season that year. I mean, they had some named players on that team, but as you watch them play, even though they had a couple of stars, it just didn't work that well. Let me just say this about Jeff Malone. If you go and look at Jeff Malone, the way he shoots his jump shot, to this day, I still believe that he has the picture-perfect jump shot. If you were a kid wanting to try to emulate the jump shot, Jeff Malone would be the guy that you should look at.
He was the king of the off-balance shot as well. He could hit from all angles. Were you calling the game that was against the Detroit Pistons where Malone fell out of bounds and hit that miracle shot?
Yes.
What do you recall about that particular moment?
He's falling out of bounds and just eats it up toward the rim, and it goes in. Now, Jeff Malone was a terrific shooter, and he could really score. And you're right, he had great body control in the air. See, that's another reason why I think I love the NBA so much, because not just his shot, but if you go back and look at Isaiah Ryder, who's falling out of bounds and just throws it over his head and it goes in. There are lots of players that have had those unbelievable shots doing something crazy. Larry Bird shot it over the top of the backboard. He's behind the backboard and scored. It just happens.
That Boston shot from Larry Bird was at Hartford Civic Center, I believe.
Yeah.
Ryder at Sacramento. Following your time covering the Bullets, what came along next for you, Jim?
I went to Pittsburgh after that, and I ended up doing the Cleveland Cavalier games as well in Cleveland, because Pittsburgh is roughly a 2-hour drive to get to Cleveland on the turnpike. So you can easily get there, and they needed a television play-by-play broadcaster, and they asked me if I would do the game. So I did their games a couple of years as well.
Now, you mentioned the NBA of the 1980s particularly was an era that you really love, looking back on your career and your life as a sports fan. Do you have a particular favorite moment or interaction you've had with some NBA players over that journey there that comes to mind?
Wow. The Wes Unseld moment when the fight broke out is pretty special.
That is.
I'll tell you this story. Rest his soul, Wilt Chamberlain. We're in Los Angeles getting ready to do a Lakers game. Again with Wes. And Wilt Chamberlain is there, and he comes over, greets Wes. And Wes introduces me, and I shook Wilt's hand. My whole arm disappeared. His hands were so large. What a great guy. Wilt says to Wes, when you guys are done with the game, do you want to come up to the house, have a beer? We were going to Phoenix the next day, but the flight wasn't until noon because we had 2 days off. So we didn't have to worry about that early morning flight. So Wes said, yeah, you want to go? I said, sure. So after the game, we're walking through the Lakers arena at the Forum. There's a guy with a sign with our names on it. We get in the car, and he takes us up to Wilt's house. Wilt's house, you'll have to look it up. Just type in Wilt Chamberlain's house. Just spectacular. Even back then, just spectacular. Up on a huge hill that looked out over the city and the ocean. Wilt's house was built specifically for Wilt, who is legit 7'1". So the ceilings were 20 to 30 feet high. The rooms were huge. And we were there probably just a couple of hours, 5 or 6 of us just talking. And then we left and went back to the hotel that night. This is an honest to God true story. I asked Wilt, where's the bathroom? And he says, oh, yeah, just go right down that hall. I'm not the tallest guy, okay? I go down the hall. I walk into the bathroom. Remember I said the house was built specifically for Wilt?
Yes.
The toilet is up so high, there was a step stool to the side. I had to climb on the step stool so I could pee in Wilt's toilet. True story. True story.
Oh, my goodness. That is hilarious. I could just picture that too.
I'm just glad there wasn't cameras and we had cell phones and things like that. That was funny. It really was. When I told Wes about that, when we got back to the hotel, the big man was like rolling down on the floor laughing so hard. It was nuts. I looked at it like, how the hell am I going to do this? Obviously, when he has friends there, they're not tall as Wilt. So I had to put the step stool there, stand on the first step of the step stool so I could relieve myself.
That is hilarious. I really appreciate you sharing these stories. I didn't know that one was going to head there, so that was great to hear. What involvement do you have with radio and TV today, Jim?
I still do several sports talk radio shows, and I still do some play-by-play. I'm kind of like on different people's call lists. I'm slowing it down now. I'm a little older now. I don't like to get on airplanes and fly all over like I used to. Remember, I was doing college football and basketball for ESPN and ABC for over 20 years as well. So I lived on airplanes a lot of my career. It's not that I'm afraid of flying. Obviously, that's not it. The way that everything has changed, the hassles at the airport, I just don't want to do that every day. For an example, when you're one of the top broadcasters now, and I'll just use Kirk Herbstreit, who does the college football show. Well, he flies private. So for him, it's a lot easier to do because he can go from his house to the Thursday night NFL game and then get to wherever college game day that they're going to do that show and then take off again and make the game that night. When I told you about the story, how I did the NBA game on the East Coast and the North American Soccer League on the West Coast in the same day, can never do that. Now, you would have to fly a private carrier. I'm not doing that.
That's understandable. It's been a pleasure to have you join the show today and talk about your memories of your broadcasting career. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
As much as I enjoy living life, I was lucky to find what I was good at. And I always try to tell people, find what you're good at and then pursue it. And I was fortunate to find that out in college and was able to pursue it. I worked extremely hard to get to the places where I was able to call all of those games and be on television almost my entire adult life. It is something that I cherish deeply, and I've made a lot of really good friends along the way.
Great to hear that. Thanks for being a part of the show today, Jim.
Thank you so much, man, for having me on. You have a great day.
Thanks for listening. I welcome your interaction with the show. Tap the microphone icon on my website to send me a voicemail. Suggest discussion topics or guests you'd like to hear conversations with. Worldwide, the show has 206 ratings on Apple Podcasts with an average of 4.9 stars with 102 reviews across all providers. Thanks for your continued support. If you add a review, I'd love to read it out on a future episode. Your ratings and reviews are one of the best ways to support the podcast. If you enjoy the show, please tell your basketball-loving friends about it. Word-of-mouth recommendations are truly worth their weight in gold. Stay up to date with my podcast and subscribe to my free NBA history newsletter. You'll receive exclusive details on upcoming episodes, future guests to appear on the show, and more. Sign up via my website or simply email me, inallairness@gmail.com. You can follow my show in various ways. Search In All Airness, 3 words, on your listening app of choice. The show is available on most platforms. Check the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with a great range of guests. Join me next time for another edition of the show.